Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. So is there any particular reason you can't give me that explanation now? Naruto asked evenly. An instant later, realizing how rude he'd sounded, he added, Hokage-sama, sir. The information Mizuki divulged to you in the forest tonight is classified as a secret of the highest order, Sarutobi said. He ate in a small drag from the pipe he now held to his mouth. If we are to speak of it, it must be in complete solitude. Out in the open like this, you never know who might overhear, and for your own sake, it must remain a secret of the highest order. You may have some inkling as to why this is, already. Fair enough, Naruto sighed, looking to the stars in irritation. If the kids at the academy knew what I am, he had to repress a shudder. If the kids at the academy had known what he was, there would be more to put up with than simple mocking or indifference. There would be undisguised hatred and fear, not much different than what Naruto had always picked up from a good portion of the village's adult population. But still, the suspense is killing me. Mindful of the Third Lord's age, Naruto hadn't complained when they set off for the Hokage Tower at a comfortable walking pace. Patience was a part of being a ninja, and whatever Naruto might feel about the night's revelation, he was still in the presence of the highest-ranking shinobi in the entire Land of Fire, and that same man had just authorized Naruto's own graduation. There was a part of the boy that wanted to yell and scream and demand an answer right now, but it was an urge he suppressed without much trouble. They now strolled down a side street in the village, the forest a good distance behind them. Naruto's eyes were getting a bit heavy now. He reckoned he'd been running on a mix of adrenaline and pure stubbornness when he'd had his run-in with Mizuki. It didn't help that he'd found sleep hard to come by the night before his exam. The waning moon was high in the sky when they reached the tower, and the Hokage led him through a more legit entry point than he'd taken the last time he'd entered the building, the front door. The Hokage led Naruto up to his office, closing and locking the door behind him. Naruto looked around the office as Sarutobi turned on the light. For the office of a shinobi village, Naruto thought it looked quite basic. Although the large windows behind the desk provided a magnificent view of the whole village, the contents of the room itself weren't remotely showy or opulent, merely functional. Naruto's first thought was that the room embodied what good ninja were made of. He liked it. The Hokage made his laborious way to the chair behind the desk, sighing out pipe smoke as he sat. There were no other chairs in the room, so Naruto moved to stand before the Third Lord's desk. As Sarutobi took in a long drag from his pipe, trying to work out how to begin, Naruto spoke up first. According to Mizuki, said Naruto, obviously forcing his voice to remain calm, the fourth Hokage sealed the nine-tailed fox inside of my body. He took a deep breath. He was telling the truth, I gather. Sarutobi exhaled, then went about putting out and putting away his pipe. It was a long moment before he answered. Yes, he said at length. More than 12 years ago now, the nine-tailed fox attacked the hidden leaf. The fourth Hokage thwarted this menace by sealing it away. Specifically, he selected a newborn infant, its umbilical cord freshly cut, and trapped the essence of the beast within the child's body. And I was the lucky little thumber that got saddled with the salvation of Konoha, Naruto deadpanned. Is there any reason I wasn't told about this before now? Sir. Sarutobi folded his hands on the desk in front of him, supporting his chin on his hands in what Naruto's mind identified as the Sasuke position. Except, well, with less brooding. It was always my intention to tell you when you were old enough to bear the burden, the old man said. I had thought that wouldn't be for several years, yet. If I may say so, you're taking this bombshell rather more gracefully than I had anticipated. The old man waited in silence for a response. When Naruto didn't give him one, he continued, eventually I would have had to whether I wished to or not, considering the danger the nine tails poses. Naruto's brow furrowed. Oh, good, he said with an exasperated laugh. Dangers. It's not enough that it's trapped in my body, is it? Is that why the villagers always seemed so wary of me? Not exactly, said Sarutobi, sounding uncomfortable now. There is some possibility of the Nine Tails' power breaking through the seal at some point in the future, but none of those alive at the time of the sealing know the specifics of your condition. Why, then? Naruto asked, his frustration bleeding through into his voice. To the Hokage, he sounded just a little desperate, and a little sad. Fear, said Sarutobi. It's as simple as that. The fourth Hokage, when he died, expressed his wish that you be regarded as a hero by the people in this village, for your sacrifice, your part in containing the beast that had come so close to destroying everything we are and everything we hold dear. He shook his head, stood up, and turned to look out at the village. He clasped his hands behind him and closed his eyes. Behind him, Naruto waited. His face was impassive as usual, but his hands were balled into fists, broadcasting his distress in spite of the boy's efforts to remain calm and respectful. Quote. Unfortunately, the memory of that night is not easily left behind, Sarutobi sighed. I knew it was too much to hope that the shinobi of that generation would ever accept you, so I had hoped that by forbidding any from divulging the truth, you might at least find acceptance amongst your own peers. That didn't fly, either, Naruto stated matter-of-factly. No, agreed Sarutobi. No, it did not. After the sealing, I decreed that none may speak of your status as the human container of the nine-tailed fox. Even those who whispered of it were punished severely. But this was not enough to prevent the fear and hatred of those who knew the truth from infecting those who didn't. The Hokage looked over his shoulder at Naruto, whose expression was one of incomprehension. The children sensed their parents' intense feelings of fear and hate, and without knowing why, they emulated those feelings as children tend to. That and their parents warned them not to associate with that evil Uzumaki brat, Naruto quipped, massaging the bridge of his nose. I imagine they did, at that, Sarutobi admitted. And those children who received no such warning from their parents need only have followed the lead of those who had. In the end, the fourth's last wish was spurned by those he gave his life to protect, and as the child who carries the weight of that sacrifice inside his very body, you were forced to live and grow under the cold gaze of a world that would, if it had its way, deny you even the right to exist. Sarutobi sighed, and began to turn his head to gaze out at the village again, when he heard a derisive snort. He regarded Naruto with a raised eyebrow, seeing that the boy was smiling and chuckling to himself. Deny me the right to exist, the boy echoed. Like hell, he shook his head, and calmed himself. Hokage-sama, is there anything else I need to know? If not, I'd like to go home. I need some time to process this, but it shouldn't be a problem. Sarutobi thought about the question for a few moments before responding. In truth, there were a great many things the boy should be made aware of at some stage, that he was not the only such demon container, for example, or that the shinobi nations regarded entities such as the Nine Tails as weapons, tools to be exploited, that there was always a chance that elements outside the leaf might discover his condition, and try to seize this asset for themselves. Or the identities of his mother and father. Instead, Hiruzen Sarutobi said only this: this information is still a secret of the highest order, Naruto. Take care not to dispense it lightly, for your safety, and the safety of those around you. You're not going to order me to keep it to myself. I am going to request that you to keep it to yourself, Sarutobi said. But, he added, if there is anyone you trust enough to share this burden with, you have my permission to tell them. Naruto nodded, and then turned to depart. As he opened the door and made to step through it, Sarutobi reminded him to present himself at the academy between 11:00 and 3 in the afternoon to fill out his ninja registration and have his identification portrait taken. Naruto assured the Third Lord that he would do so, and set out in silence for his run-down little corner of existence. Hiruzen Sarutobi remained in his office, gazing out over the village he was sworn to protect with his life, for quite some time after Naruto had departed. Yes, he reflected, Naruto had taken the bombshell amazingly well. When Mizuki had dropped it on him in the forest, this boy, this 12-year-old boy, had somehow managed to keep his composure and follow through with the task he had taken on. He had been patient and respectful about seeking his answers, and he had accepted the harsh truth without complaint. What amazed the third Hokage most was that the one question he had most expected the boy to ask had never once come up. Now, he wondered if Naruto had even thought to ask it. The question in question was, why me? As Sarutobi thought on this, pipe in hand and a gentle haze of smoke drifting up around him, he closed his eyes and saw his deceased successor in his mind's eye. He's a fine boy, Minato, he thought. If you could see him now, I think you'd be proud of him. Sarutobi stood there for several more minutes before extinguishing both his pipe and the light. When he turned in for the night, his last thought before drifting off to sleep was that if this night's events were anything to go by, the only child of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki would certainly grow up to be a fine shinobi. Sasuke had assumed the position, by sheer force of habit as he sat alone at Ichiraku's the next day. He had been the first to arrive. This was usually the case for everything, be it school, sparring meetups, or lunch with his friends. If asked, Sasuke would have said it was because he had nothing better to do. The truth was a bit more complicated, but not exactly contrary to the statement. 2 minutes after Sasuke's arrival, Hinata Hyuga brushed aside the banners shrouding the noodle bar's entrance and slumped onto a seat, yawning loudly as she did. Sasuke sent her a questioning glance. Hinata shrugged as she looked back at Sasuke. There was one empty bar stool between the two, reserved for Naruto, and said, I had a little trouble sleeping last night. Sasuke grunted and reassumed the position. Hinata, in spite of herself, giggled a bit. Then her humor subsided as she recalled the events of the previous night, shifting uncomfortably in seat. Naruto would be here any minute. Yo. Hinata jumped with a meep. As the object of her thoughts poked that particularly ticklish part of her torso. Damn it, Naruto. Stop doing that. She squirmed silently, and vaulted into a sitting position on the seat between Sasuke and Hinata. Both of them turned surprised faces at their red-haired friend and his suddenly upbeat attitude. Heya, Sasuke, Hina-chan, Naruto said. Old man, Ayame, he added with a nod to the owner of the establishment, who was making his way over to his 3 regulars. Tyuki's daughter, looking as sunny as ever, turned to them with a smile. Naruto, we missed you yesterday, Ayame said. Where were you? Gee, good morning, Naruto-kun, Hinata said, trying to act natural, which was easier than she'd thought it would be, actually. Shall I take the brooding silence as a good morning from you, too? Naruto said to Sasuke, grin as foxy as always. Grunted Sasuke. You seem cheerful for an academy reject. What's up? Oh, don't get me started on that yet, cuz boy, do I have a story for you guys, Naruto said. Oi, old man, ramen's on me today, so I'll take the usual. What'll you two have? I told you it'd be my treat, Sasuke reminded him, but Naruto just laughed. Nah, I wanna celebrate my graduation. And what better way than by treating my 2 most favoritist people in the whole wide world to lunch at the best ramen stand in the universe. There were a few seconds of stunned silence at this proclamation. Best ramen stand in the universe, he says, muttered a star-struck Tyuki, wiping an imaginary tear from his eye. The moment broken, Hinata spluttered out something that went unheard as Sasuke exclaimed, wait, what? We thought you failed the exam. I did fail, but I told you, I have a hell of a story for you guys, Naruto said. A lot happened last night. Take your orders already, so I can tell it. He winked at Hinata. This one'll knock your socks off. Hinata felt her face heat up, but it wasn't the usual pleasant kind of embarrassment she felt whenever Naruto showed some kind of flirting interest in her. She had a feeling she knew what story he was about to tell. So Sasuke and Hinata ordered their ramen and Naruto launched into his tale. It started with Mizuki approaching him in the forest with a bogus story about a secret scroll that acted as a kind of alternate exam for students who showed promise but hadn't quite managed to score high enough on this or that portion of the exam proper. Sasuke had made a skeptical snort before Naruto had even finished explaining that Mizuki had attempted to hoist on him. Hinata listened in silence as Naruto recounted the very incident she had witnessed in part through her Byakugan without his knowledge, barely touching her meal. Naruto, of course, left out the part about the 9 tails being sealed away inside his own body. Tsuki and Ayame hung onto his every word as they worked. Despite the relative business of lunch hour, Sasuke remained impassive until the part where Naruto recounted his defeat of Mizuki, which elicited a smirk from the prodigy. So then Iruka-sensei helped me hold Mizuki until Hokage-sama arrived with reinforcements. And then Iruka-sensei asked Hokage-sama if he could make an exception and let me graduate. I could hardly believe it. Naruto slurped down the last of his ramen. I don't have my leaf headband yet, but I'm heading to the academy to take care of registration after lunch. As Tsuki and Ayame congratulated Naruto on his past due graduation, Hinata stared down at her untouched ramen, trying to work out exactly what she was feeling at that moment. On the one hand, Naruto had graduated in the end after all, they would all advance to the rank of shinobi together, exactly as she had hoped. But she wondered what Naruto was really feeling at that moment. He'd always been one to keep his true feelings bottled up behind a smile and a confident demeanor, and after what Mizuki had said. Hina-chan. Hinata's head snapped up. Naruto was giving her that same lopsided grin that he'd. Oh god, I thought I'd die from embarrassment when I woke up and realized I'd passed out in front of Naruto. That he'd given her on the day they'd become friends. So, are you going to at least pretend to be happy for me, or are you going to keep trying to eat your ramen with your eyes? Hinata arranged her face into a smile. I am happy, Naruto-kun, she said, and she meant it. Oh, good, Naruto said with an exaggerated sigh of relief. Then, seriously, Hina-chan, is there something on your mind? Hinata blinked once. No, Naruto-kun. You're a bad liar, Sasuke noted without looking, before picking up his bowl to drink the broth. Hinata winced as Naruto nodded firmly and said, terrible, terrible liar. No talent for deception at all. Utterly and completely hopeless as a ninja. Naruto-kun, Hinata whined. But all jokes aside, Naruto said, sobering up, is something bothering you, Hina-chan? You know you can talk to us, right? He frowned. Is that cousin of yours being a douche-nozzle again? Hinata looked from Naruto to Sasuke and back again. Even the stoic, brooding one was looking somewhat concerned, now. God, but these two were such good friends, and now here she was making them worry. Hinata's smile was entirely natural as she said, don't worry about me. I'm fine. She turned back to her meal and picked up her chopsticks. It doesn't matter, anyway, she said happily. But thanks for asking. Naruto, Sasuke, and Hinata set out for the Ninja Academy together. Sasuke had already filed his registration before meeting them at Ichiraku's, showing up at 11 on the dot. Hinata and Naruto had both slept in. Sasuke had opted to accompany them back to the academy purely for the hell of it. It's not like I can spar without you guys, he'd said. Naruto knew this to be mostly bullshit. The boy had done more than his share of independent training on the grounds of the Uchiha compound. Still, knowing that the resident antisocial angst machine would rather spend time with his friends than with a training dummy made Naruto feel all warm and fuzzy inside. When they walked into their homeroom, Iruka looked up from his desk, blinked when he saw who it was, and smiled. Naruto. Hinata-chan. Sasuke. He added. Didn't you already come by earlier? Was Sasuke's only response, so Naruto shrugged and said. Oh, you know how it is, Iruka-sensei. He just couldn't resist the lure of all those tacular fangirls, he just had to come back for seconds, oof. Sasuke had nailed Naruto with a hard elbow to the ribcage. Hinata giggled. Huh, Iruka said. In any event, Naruto. Naruto snapped off a salute. Yeah, boss. Iruka stood up and opened a desk drawer, extracting a folded blue cloth before turning to Naruto. Just to make it official, he said, seeing Naruto's eyes light up at the sight of the swirl-patterned hidden leaf insignia on the unsullied Hittite forehead protector. Iruka held the item up in both, presenting it to Naruto, who strode forward and accepted it with a victorious grin. Congratulations, graduate, Iruka said. Do yourself, and your village, proud as you walk the path to becoming a true shinobi. Thank you, Iruka-sensei, Naruto answered with a bow. I will. Naruto turned to face his two friends, his smile widening. Sasuke smirked and Hinata outright beamed. Iruka watched as the Uchiha and the Hyuga, almost as one, reached into their supply satchels and withdrew their own leaf headbands. Hinata reached back with one hand and carelessly undid the knot on her cloth headband, revealing the caged bird seal branded to her forehead. The three children looked each other in the eyes, and simultaneously, all three donned their Hittite, almost as if they'd rehearsed this moment. And to think the Uchiha and Hyuga clans had always had such chilly relations in the past, Iruka mused. After that touching scene, Iruka instructed Naruto and Hinata to fill out the registration forms he'd given them. Then they were to report to the Hokage's office on the far side of the academy to turn in their registrations and swear their oaths of service to the village and its leader. Once that was done and over with, all three were to present themselves to the photographer at the Hokage Tower to have their portraits taken in front of the great stone faces. It was tedious busywork, but that bubbly feeling in their stomachs kept the two of them floating on through it. Sasuke mostly just hovered in the background the whole time. An onlooker may have thought he was bored, but those two who knew him best could tell he was in high spirits. They recognized the energy in his body language, and the slight spring in step as he led them to the Hokage's office. And here you are, Hokage-sama, Naruto said, holding up his registration form. Hinata stood beside him, and Sasuke hovered off the side, leaning against the office wall with his arms crossed. The Hokage had made no objections to his presence. Oddly, the old man had seemed pleased by it. Sarutobi, sitting behind a simple school desk, took both Naruto's and Hinata's paperwork. Flipping through Naruto's, he eventually said, "Yes, it appears that everything is in order." As he was skimming through Hinata's registration, however, the door to the office suddenly slid open. "Old man, prepare yourself." And a child's voice, obnoxiously loud, split the air. The three graduates looked on in puzzlement as a young boy, long, blue scarf trailing behind him, barreled into the room and charged ungracefully at the third Hokage, who simply rubbed his right temple in agitation. No sooner had the boy charged than he'd fallen flat on his face. Ow! Groaning and grumbling, the boy pushed himself to a kneeling position, rubbing his smarting cheek. "Aha!" he declared. "It's a trap, right? You set a trap." The three graduates continued to stare. Abruptly, the boy hopped to his feet and pointed an accusing finger at the closest person to him, which happened to be Naruto. You tripped me," he said. But I didn't do anything," Naruto deadpanned. At this point Hinata was overcome by a fit of the giggles. "Hey, Hokage-sama," Naruto said. "Who's the squirt?" "Squirt?" the boy repeated furiously. "That is my grandson, Konohamaru," Sarutobi sighed. "This is his second sneak attack today. I anticipate at least 4 more by dinner time." "Okay," Naruto said. Then he took a few steps toward Konohamaru and got down on his knees, so he could look the boy square in the eye. "What are you looking at?" Konohamaru snapped, hopping back a step, and then stumbling. Righting himself, he assumed what the room's other occupants identified as quite possibly the sloppiest rendition of the Academy Taijutsu stance ever to grace the village with its failure. "That was a cunning trick, but I'm on to you. You won't trip me a second t. Ow." Naruto had jabbed Konohamaru, hard, in the forehead with his index finger. Konohamaru staggered backward several more steps, arms flailing round and round, before falling flat on his butt. Pro tip: squirt, Naruto sniggered. If you want to assassinate Hokage-sama, you might want to work on your footing a bit first. And for the record, you tripped over your own feet, genius. Konohamaru rubbed his forehead, looking stunned. Hinata, giggling, cleared her throat to still herself. You're so mean, Naruto-kun. Honorable grandson. Naruto flinched. Hinata, meeked, and even Sasuke looked a bit perturbed at this latest newcomer. Standing in the doorway was a shinobi dressed all in black, with circular sunglasses and his headband tied bandana style. The man's appearance was unremarkable, but my god was his voice loud. And obnoxious. And just a tiny bit fruity. There you are, honorable grandson, the man said, closing the distance between himself and Konohamaru in a single stride. Konohamaru cast one sour look at the man and then crossed his arms. Oh, hi, Ebisu-sensei, he mumbled. You shouldn't be sitting on this floor, honorable grandson, it's filthy, Ebisu said, waggling a finger at the boy, who, grumbling, compliantly stood up. Well, then, Naruto said, standing up, with that little distraction out of the way, we can get back to the whole oaths of service thing. Naruto gave Konohamaru's head a few hearty pats. Hey, the boy stammered. Take care, squirt, and remember to work on your footing, said Naruto before moving to stand before the Hokage's desk again. The elite ninja instructor in charge of Konohamaru's pre-academy training was at first appalled by the flagrant lack of respect that this red-haired boy was displaying for the honorable grandson of the honorable third Hokage, but then he recognized those whisker marks and it all made sense. The nine-tailed fox, he sneered silently, feeling his own lips curl in distaste. The village disgrace. Naruto stood before the Hokage next to an indigo-haired girl, who was looking directly at Ebisu, her face a portrait of disdain. Ebisu felt his own expression falter. At that moment, Naruto glanced at his female friend, then at Ebisu. Naruto's eyes met Ebisu's. Ebisu's expression hardened. Honorable grandson, it's time for your afternoon shuriken training seminar, Ebisu declared, turning to where the boy stood. Let us be gone from here. He ended it as a question because Konohamaru was no longer in the room with them. Honorable grandson, wailed Ebisu. Honorable grandson, where have you gone? He slipped out while you were glaring at Naruto, but I have no idea where he's going, Sarutobi said, sounding sublimely unconcerned. At that, Ebisu shrieked. There's really no other word for it. He shrieked, and bolted for the door. A distressed cry of, honorable grandson, could be heard as he bounded down the corridors of the academy like a madman. Sarutobi's left eye twitched. Naruto just said, huh, and faced front once again. Hinata and Sasuke, on the other hand, took a good while longer to get the ringing out of their ears. Certified graduate or not, Naruto still wanted to get that damn doppelganger technique down. This he announced as they left the academy, having delivered their identification photos to the Hokage's office. What's the point? Said Sasuke. You've already graduated, and besides, the art of the doppelganger is only any good for fooling civilians and low-level ninja. It's not about the technique itself, Sasuke, Naruto replied, shaking his head. The thing is, whatever problem I'm having with my chakra control that makes this jutsu so impossible. I want it dead. Gone. Finished. Got it. I am mastering this jutsu no matter how much time it wastes. So, any ideas? He looked to Hinata as he said this, who shrugged uneasily. I don't know, Naruto-kun, but, what? Well, I've been thinking about it a bit, and I think. You've been thinking, so obviously you can think, Naruto said dryly. Hinata mock pouted, then continued, I think you just have more trouble manipulating chakra, outside of your own body. Quote. Sasuke did that moody little, grunt of his. Makes sense, he said. Most of the jutsu taught at the academy requires the user to manipulate chakra within or in very close proximity to their own body, whereas the doppelganger requires you to expel chakra and manifest it, then maintain and control that manifestation, externally. It doesn't require much more power than transformation, but Naruto's eyebrows crunched together. If it takes more power than transformation, then why can't I undershoot the power requirement? I can't say for sure, but. Hinata clasped her hands behind her back, looking at the sky thoughtfully. If it's harder for you to control chakra outside of your body, maybe it's also harder for you to control how much chakra you use for those kinds of techniques. GGH, Naruto growled. Well, what am I supposed to do about that? There are exercises that can be done to increase one's chakra control, but they take a lot of time to master. All three stopped in their tracks, staring at a patch of wood fence that was obviously not a patch of wood fence. Rather, it was a sheet of fence-patterned camouflage. This was a very basic ninja concealment technique, called the Cloak of Invisibility. Used properly, it allowed a shinobi to hide unseen behind a perfectly positioned sheet of camouflage that would completely fool one's sense of sight. Used properly, that is. This was an example of just about everything not to do. For one thing, the hands, feet, and hair of the individual concealed behind the sheet were poking out like warning lights. The sheet itself was sideways, the planks in the fence pattern running completely the wrong way. That it was also rippling in the breeze just seemed like an insignificant detail next to how badly the technique had been utilized. Naruto blinked, and glanced at his two companions. Hinata just stared, looking as if she pitied the man behind the curtain. Sasuke was wearing his "that's so lame it's not even funny" face. Naruto leaned over to Hinata, cupped a hand to the side of his mouth, and said in a very loud whisper, "Maybe if we ignore him, he'll go away." Saw through my disguise, huh? The sheet was tossed aside and there was Konohamaru. "You're slick, boss. The rumors of your prowess don't lie." He walked resolutely up to Naruto and stood at attention. "Please, take me as your apprentice." Naruto rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, yeah, I'm pretty good at what I do, but you're a bit young to be worrying about whether you can cut it in the sack, aren't you?" Hinata blushed, Sasuke groaned, and Konohamaru said, what? Guess that was bound to fly over his head, huh?" Naruto chuckled quietly. Naruto, you shouldn't make jokes like that in front of kids," squeaked Hinata. Konohamaru looked back and forth between Hinata and Naruto several times before saying, "Aha. It's some super secret ninjutsu thing, isn't it?" If anything, it's taijutsu." Naruto murmured, "You know, the physical art." Konohamaru, face lighting up with misguided understanding, exclaimed, "I got it, boss. You guys have to show me how to do it. Teach me, come on, teach me." Hinata's blush intensified to its maximum power level. Sasuke's face got to know his palm a little better. Naruto shrugged, grinned that foxy grin of his in Hinata's direction, and quipped, "I'm game if you are." It was just a little too much for the poor girl. Her world went white and she was spared the pain of cracking her head on the pavement by Naruto, who caught her as she fell. "You did that on purpose," Sasuke hissed as they bent to make sure their friend was okay. Naruto returned his accusing look with one of exasperation. "I didn't think she'd pass out again. He scratched at the whisker mark on his left cheek. "She's just really cute when she's embarrassed, is all," he whispered. Sasuke rolled his eyes, and the two attempted to shake her awake as Konohamaru looked on in confusion. Alright, boss," a child's voice, and rather a bratty one at that, was saying as Hinata drifted back to consciousness. "So will you teach me that taijutsu thing you were talking about now?" "Patience, grasshopper," another, older voice said. "First of all, that was a joke. Second, yeah, I'll help you work on your taijutsu. Or rather, we will. Right, Sasuke. Why am I getting dragged into this?" a third voice snapped. Hinata found herself awakening in a sitting position, leaning against something, a tree. Her brain felt like it was wading through swamp water. What had just happened? Where? Her vision clearing somewhat, she took in her surroundings. It's our training spot, she realized. And before I passed out, that kid was there, and someone walked into her field of vision, kneeling in front of her. She blinked. Red hair, whisker marks, blue eyes. And Naruto-kun, she groaned. Then, you did that on purpose. Everyone's just lining up to question my chivalry today, sighed Naruto. Anyway, you alright? Need a little time to rest? And no, I'm fine, Hinata insisted, and stood up to prove it. Brushing the dirt off her clothes, she took in the scene before her, which included an impatient Konohamaru and one very irate Uchiha. We were just about to give the lil squirt some help with his taijutsu, said Naruto. Quietly, he added in a sarcastic mutter so that only Hinata could hear him, that probably means teaching him how to fight from the ground up. This is gonna be fun. Konohamaru plopped down on the grass, wiping a sheen of sweat off his brow. He'd been here for 3 hours now, and although they had taken a couple short breaks during that time, Konohamaru had never been so exhausted in his life. But it was weird, a kind of exhilarating sort of exhaustion that felt like getting somewhere. And he was getting somewhere. Things had started off pretty rocky, but Wadayamean, you won't teach me off and see what's it's stuff. Konohamaru protested lamely. Naruto, who stood in front of him, heaved a long-suffering sigh. Off to the side, Hinata sat on her knees on the grass, watching the exchange in quiet amusement while Sasuke stood leaning against a tree behind her. Konohamaru had never seen such a grumpy-looking dude in his life. I mean, Naruto said in that I'd better speak slowly so this has time to penetrate that thick skull of yours voice, that you're too small for punches and kicks to be effective, so it's better to focus on agility and evasion for now. I'm not small, Konohamaru growled. The moment he'd said this, he found himself flat on his yet again, rubbing his forehead. Naruto had jabbed him with his index finger. Again. Yes, you are, Naruto said. You're a squirt and that's the end of that. You'll get bigger as you get older, and you'll get stronger as you get bigger. In the meantime, get a head start on learning to read, anticipate, and avoid taking hits in battle. In a way, that's actually more important than throwing punches or kicks of your own. Konohamaru pouted as he got to his feet. But if I can't hit the guy I'm supposed to be fighting, what's the point of all that other stuff? Naruto gave Konohamaru a look that said, seriously, did you really just ask that? Off to the side, Konohamaru heard the grumpy dude mutter something about, why I hate kids. Alright, let me make this real simple for you, squirt, said Naruto. What happens if you don't see a punch or kick coming? You get hit. Duh. Right. Now what happens if you see it coming but aren't fast enough to stop it from hitting you? You get hit. Right. Now, at what point during all of that, getting hit, do you actually manage to score a hit on your opponent? I guess. Learning to read and anticipate your enemy's moves allows you time to avoid taking unnecessary damage during a fight, Naruto explained evenly. Training to increase your own speed, endurance, and acrobatic abilities, then, allows you to put your ability to anticipate enemy attacks to use and avoid or block those attacks. Further down the line, when you actually do learn offensive taijutsu, you can utilize all of these skills in order to get around your opponent's defenses for maximum damage. If you find yourself fighting an opponent who is beyond you, mastering these skills will allow you to maximize your chances of survival. You'll have what you need to last out an encounter until backup arrives, or escape with as little injury as possible. Oh, Konohamaru said. Well, yeah. Are you seriously telling me that your instructor hasn't taught you this stuff yet? Naruto deadpanned. Not yet, no. The next half hour had been filled with a lot of tripping and falling for poor little Konohamaru, as Naruto and a reluctant Sasuke demonstrated and instructed the boy in how to move swiftly in all directions without blunder. Eventually, Konohamaru had found himself facing off against the red-haired boy in a mock battle. Naruto would attack Konohamaru, and Konohamaru would try to avoid taking hits without turning his back to Naruto or running away. While this battle took place, Sasuke would occasionally chime in with sage, if grudging pieces of advice which Konohamaru would then attempt, often unsuccessfully, to implement into his flimsy technique. Not long after the mock battle began, Konohamaru had toppled onto Hisense again, having been shoved roughly by the shoulder. He'd let out a snarl of frustration and hopped to his feet, but had been too ticked off to anticipate Naruto's next attack, which was another prod to the forehead that had resulted in another butt flop onto the grass. Calm down, Squirt, Naruto admonished him. Get all riled up in a fight and you'll lose your focus. Lose your focus and you'll take a kunai to the skull. I don't know what a kunai to the skull feels like, but I don't expect it's a whole lot of fun, and one kinda needs their brain in one piece too, you know, not get killed. Konohamaru growled something unintelligible as he stood up, but a voice from the sidelines called out to him and gave him pause. Calm down, Konohamaru-kun, said the indigo-haired girl who'd been watching their match since it had started. Don't let the hits you take discourage you. Just take them like a ninja, and learn from them. Konohamaru stared back at the quiet girl, his bluster extinguished and his expression slack-jawed. Did she just call me? Ah, you're quoting me now. Naruto replied with a coy smile. Hinata blushed a bit at that, and suddenly seemed very interested in a passing blackbird. She called me by my first name, Konohamaru thought dazedly. And not even something like, Konohamaru-sama, or anything like that. She just called me by my first name. Suddenly he was full of energy and raring to go. The last hour had seen the most progress. By the end, Konohamaru had successfully, if clumsily, managed to dodge 8 attacks in a row without stumbling once, and at one point Naruto had attempted to surprise the boy with a low sweeping kick. Konohamaru, letting out a cry of alarm, had hopped over it. He'd landed on his behind rather than his feet, but instead of calling him on his poor footwork, Naruto had complimented Konohamaru for reacting in time to avoid having his feet kicked out from under him. Naruto had called an end to their training session some time after that, saying he had his own training to take care of, but had offered Konohamaru his own bento as a reward for working so hard today. So Konohamaru dug in as Sasuke and Hinata savored their own meals. The sun was sinking into the west. Sundown was a little while off yet, but it was getting a bit late. Konohamaru sniggered to himself as he imagined the distress his instructor, Ebisu, must be in even now as he scoured the village for his charge. Konohamaru's 3 friends, the boss, the grumpy dude, and the quiet girl with the weird eyes, sat huddled around him, the 4 of them together eating their bentos in a comfortable, comfy little circle. It was a happy feeling, Konohamaru thought, being so casual and familiar with these guys. Hey, Squirt, Naruto asked. Stop calling me Squirt, Konohamaru grumbled. Would you prefer Bean Sprout? Hinata nudged Naruto playfully. Stop being so mean, Naruto-kun. He has a name, right? Konohamaru-kun. Konohamaru nodded firmly. Right, boss. I have a name, so use it. Alright, Naruto said dismissively. Konohamaru, then, I wanted to ask you something. Yeah, boss. What? Was with the silly little sneak attack thing you pulled back at the academy. Konohamaru's chopsticks ceased their ascent halfway and drifted back to his bento, the morsel they held uneaten. Suddenly his contented mood had clouded over. The 3rd Hokage is my grandfather, grumbled the boy. So I'm always getting special treatment. My name is Konohamaru, like the village, right? So it should be easy to remember, right? Yeah, kinda hard to forget the name of the town you live in, Naruto said, head quirked to one side. What's your point? You guys are the first people besides my family to call me by my first name, muttered Konohamaru. Naruto and Hinata looked to Konohamaru, their incomprehension obvious, but Sasuke stopped eating for the first time since their little dinner break had begun. He looked over at Konohamaru thoughtfully. He grunted thoughtfully. Quote. I get it. Konohamaru looked to the grumpy dude in surprise. Wait, what? Sasuke was silent for a moment, then turned to Hinata and Naruto. You guys remember what I was saying about the kids at the academy? Back when Naruto asked me about my, fangirl problem. Hinata's brow crunched up as she tried to remember, but Naruto nodded. Something about them not caring about you as a person, right? That's right, Konohamaru exclaimed, looking comically furious. Everything's all, honored grandson, this and, honored grandson, that. Nobody sees me for who I am. Hinata whispered. Oh, and Naruto leaned back on his arms. Not seeing you for you. Huh, he mused. Yeah, I think I get where you're coming from. I'm still not connecting the dots between, nobody sees me for me, and, I have to assassinate my grandfather, though, Sasuke said dryly before returning to his food. I don't want to kill him. Konohamaru insisted. I just have to beat him. So, Naruto prompted. So I can become Hokage. Konohamaru said. If I can become Hokage, everyone will have to show me respect. And not just that stupid, fake, honored grandson, respect. Real respect. You're looking to step out of the old man's shadow, Naruto said. Yeah, that. But Konohamaru-kun, Hinata said, raising her hands in a gesture of calm down, kiddo, you can't become Hokage by attacking your grandfather. She's right, you know, Sasuke murmured. He popped a bite of food into his mouth, chewed, and swallowed. Because you're still a little kid, it's just annoying. But if you were our age, it'd be considered juvenile delinquency. If you were an adult, it'd be a one-way ticket to prison. Well, Konohamaru spluttered. Then how do I become Hokage? The Hokage's the strongest ninja in the village, right? So I have to prove that I'm stronger than the old man, and I have to prove it now. He was interrupted by laughter. Cackling, in fact. He turned a furious gaze on the red-haired boy, who was slapping his knees, tears of mirth threatening to spill from his closed eyes. Hey, what gives? Konohamaru exclaimed. What's so funny? Naruto stifled his laughter with a hand over mouth as the other balled into a fist and struck his own collarbone. I said, what's so funny? Konohamaru demanded again. You are, Bean Sprout my man, Naruto said. He wiped a small tear from the corner of his eye. You say you wanna be Hokage, that you want to prove you're stronger than the wisest, most experienced man in the entire village, and you want it now. Gods above, I hope I was never this bratty when I was a squirt. Naruto-kun, Hinata protested, but Naruto waved her off before she could finish. He fixed Konohamaru with a serious look, holding up a hand to stave off another argument from the boy. Konohamaru had opened his mouth to speak, but in the face of the look Naruto was giving him, he snapped it shut. You can't just want something and expect it to happen, Konohamaru, Naruto said. Especially not something like that. Hokage. The Hokage are among the most powerful men to ever walk this earth. Their power, their skill and experience, their wisdom, all of it took decades of extremely hard-ass work to develop. You follow me, kid. Konohamaru looked skeptical. Come on, it's only my grandfather. He couldn't be that special. He is, Naruto insisted. And the other three were just as special. Now listen to me, Konohamaru, and listen good. Konohamaru sat quietly, seeming apprehensive. Sasuke, having finished his bento, turned an impassive eye on his red-haired friend. If you're serious about becoming Hokage one day, Naruto said, the first thing you need to understand is that it's going to take a really long time. Years, in fact. It's also going to take a lot of effort. Today's little training game, not even the tip of the iceberg. If you want it, you'll need to work up the will to fight for it, and you'll likely be fighting for it for the rest of your natural life. Konohamaru's young eyes were wide, and he was mouthing something, but he remained silent and attentive as Naruto continued. If you really want the title of Hokage, you'll need to quit it with these shenanigans and devote yourself completely to the dream, Naruto said. There is no fast track, and there are no shortcuts. There are many roads you can take, but all of them are long, and each is an uphill battle. He leaned toward Konohamaru, fixing him with an intense glare. Are you, Naruto said slowly, prepared to spend your life pushing a 2-ton boulder up a mountain? Because that's what it'll take: blood, sweat, and tears. Gallons and gallons of them. You'll need to work your scrawny little butt off until you can't push yourself anymore. And then you'll get some sleep, and then you'll wake up, and then you'll work your butt off some more. Can you deal with that? Konohamaru was still, quiet, and for a while just stared at Naruto. But as Hinata watched the boy, she noted several things. First, that his expression had become less uncertain. Second, that his hands had balled up into fists. Third, that he held his head high, and his young shoulders proud and steady. But before any of them could say or do anything in response to Naruto's lecture, a voice split the air and made all 4 of the children gathered in the clearing wince. There you are, honorable grandson. Oh, that's just great, groaned Konohamaru. He found us. Naruto, Sasuke, and Hinata all recognized the voice, having heard it only hours before. It had been obnoxiously loud, and just a little bit fruity. Now it was loud, fruity, and victorious. From a high branch at the edge of the clearing, Ebisu stood and looked out over the group. His eyes drifted from Konohamaru to the red-haired boy with the whisker marks, and his triumphant expression turned cold. Deftly leaping from his perch, Ebisu landed not 3 feet from the group of older children surrounding the honorable grandson of the honorable third Hokage. Ebisu's eyes were fixed on the demon brat, who was looking back at Ebisu with a raised eyebrow. All 4 of the kids stood up, turning toward him, and Ebisu appraised each of them in turn. The raven-haired one left his now empty bento box on the grass, his hands slipped into his pockets. This boy appeared completely undaunted, seeming almost bored, but Ebisu could tell that it was a front. The girl with the indigo hair, whom Ebisu recognized as a cadet branch member of the Hyuga clan, glanced uneasily at the honorable grandson before turning to really look at Ebisu. From her nervous demeanor, he judged her to be quite faint of heart. Was this really the girl who had glared at him so intensely when he'd seen her in the Hokage's office? The honorable grandson was scowling at Ebisu, and behind him, Naruto was totally at ease, brushing the grass and dirt off the backside of his pants. Honorable grandson, it's time for you to come back with me, Ebisu said smoothly, striding forward. It wouldn't do for someone of your status to be seen in the company of such riff-raff as this. He called us riff-raff, Naruto deadpanned. Sasuke, did you hear that? He called us riff-raff. I am so insulted. They aren't riff-raff, Konohamaru snapped. They're my friends, and they've been helping me train. Train, Ebisu chuckled. Honorable grandson, of what value could, training, he emphasized the word mockingly as his eyes returned to the demon boy, and his eyes took on that cold quality once again, with one such as this possibly hold. I am a Jonin, one of the elite, handpicked by our third Lord Hokage-sama to train distinguished individuals such as yourself in the ninja arts. Following my teaching principles is the fastest road to becoming the next Lord Hokage. One such as this is obviously a better teacher than you, the Hyuga girl cut in. Ebisu gave a start and looked back at the weak-hearted girl in surprise, and there it was again. That hard look of disdain. She had taken a step forward, and this time her lip was curled up in the tiniest of snarls. I beg your pardon, young lady, Ebisu said easily. But what wisdom could this urchin, who could not even successfully manage a basic doppelganger technique, possibly dispense that I could not? Hinata. Naruto was whispering, but Sasuke cut in and Naruto went unheard. Well, to start, Sasuke began in a flat tone, that there is no shortcut or fast track to becoming Hokage. He was just saying that before you got here, as a matter of fact. Right, Konohamaru. Yeah, the boy piped up. Naruto said that if I wanted to become Hokage, I would have to accept that there is no easy way to do it, and work hard. Right, boss. Konohamaru had turned to Naruto, who scratched at his whisker mark and said, yeah, I did say something like that. You don't know anything, Hinata interrupted, still giving Ebisu the eyes of death, about Naruto-kun. Naruto, taken aback, looked back and forth between Hinata and Ebisu. Hinata neither flinched nor shrunk back. Ebisu's cold expression faltered, and the man cast an uncertain look at Naruto. Sasuke was giving Hinata an appraising sort of look behind her back, which Naruto recognized as the closest thing to impressed that ever crossed his face. Anyway, Naruto said in an attempt to break the tension. We were done for the day in any case, so Konohamaru, when you're finished eating, you really should go back with your sensei. Konohamaru looked crestfallen. But, Naruto knelt down next to Konohamaru and whispered in his ear. I'm not telling you that you can't hang out with us or that you should listen to a word this guy was saying just now, but you heard him, right? This guy's a Jonin, which means he's miles ahead of any of us. He may be a bit of a screwball, but you can still learn a lot from him. Just work hard, alright? Don't skip out on any of your lessons, and if you still wanna train with me, we can do that whenever you're not working with him. He pulled back, and winked. Konohamaru looked like he'd swallowed something mildly sour, but he snapped off an awkward salute and said, Gotcha, boss. Naruto stood up and said to Ebisu, let Konohamaru polish off the last of his bento, alright. He's all yours after that. Ebisu looked mildly surprised for a moment, then he let out a half-hearted, HMPH, crossed his arms, and started tapping his foot impatiently. Hurry up. Then, honored grandson. We've no longer any time for your shuriken seminar this afternoon, so we'll have to make up for lost time tomorrow. Konohamaru looked up at Naruto, who simply nodded with a meaningful look in his eyes. Konohamaru grinned, then commenced to wolf down his bento. As Konohamaru scampered over to his instructor and the two turned to walk back to the village, Naruto called after him. Hey, Konohamaru, if I hear you've been making any more half-assed assassination attempts on the Hokage, I'll kick your scrawny little half-an-ass myself. Ebisu made an affronted sound, but Konohamaru looked over his shoulder and said, Don't worry about it, boss. I'm done playing around. Ebisu looked down at the boy. What? Did the honorable grandson just say what I think he said? Konohamaru grinned cheekily at the red-haired boy and said, No more games for me. I'm gonna work my butt off and roll that boulder all the way to the top. Just watch me. Someday you'll be calling me Hokage-sama. All of you will. Konohamaru turned back toward his objective, and began to walk, his steps full of determination and purpose. Ebisu could only follow numbly after him, lost for words. Take care, Konohamaru-kun. Hinata called as the two disappeared into the woods. As his two friends watched the boy and the obnoxious Jonin depart, Sasuke felt a small hint of a smile fighting to work its way onto his face. By the time his friends had turned back to speak amongst themselves, coming around at last to the subject of Naruto's chakra problems, he had managed to wipe the look from his face, but his own reaction had surprised him. Was it pride? He was fairly sure it was. All in all, he thought, training the little no-seppuku hadn't been so bad. Sitting alone in his office in the Hokage Tower, Hiruzen Sarutobi smiled. Then he waved his hand over the small glass viewing ball that sat on the cushion before him, dispelling the image of the clearing and its occupants. That warm smile persisted as he extracted his pipe from its pocket and lit it up, breathing in a leisurely first drag. The feeling that this particular grandparent was experiencing at that moment. Pride. Without question. Pride in his grandson's first big step on the path to becoming a true shinobi, and pride in the budding mentor who had pointed the child in the right direction. It was one of those feelings that reminded Sarutobi how old he was, but it was also a feeling that reminded him of something more important, of the very things that he, as Third Lord Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village, had sworn to uphold and protect. Moments like these were what made one's sunset years worth living. Naruto felt something poking and prodding at his forehead. Through the muddy haze of sleep, he waved it off, slapped it aside with a wobbly backhand, and went on sleeping. But the poking and prodding persisted, and he could hear a familiar voice calling to him. Damn it, Naruto, wake up. You should have known better than to beat yourself into a stupor on the night before the orientation. Oh yeah, that's right. Naruto mused, scratching at his stomach through his fishnet undershirt. We were working on that, whatcha-call-it, tree climbin' thing. And when Hinata and Sasuke called it a night, I said I'd stay out here a little while longer. Naruto realized that his bed was far too rough and uneven to be called a bed, and that something small and ticklish was skittering over one of his arms. Brushing the insect off, Naruto groaned and heaved himself to a sitting position. He'd been asleep on the ground in the usual training spot. Rubbing the sand from his eyes, he cast round for the source of that incessant prodding. When he found it, he muttered, well, that gives new meaning to the term, morning wood, ow. And then Naruto was nursing a fresh bump on the top of his head, for Sasuke had thwacked him a good one with the wooden stick he had poked Naruto awake with. You can be really disgusting sometimes, you know that. Sasuke grumbled. What can I say, Sasuke? Naruto said, not missing a beat. All that angst of yours would likely burn Konoha to the ground without a good, solid counterpoint to balance the karma. So, what time is it? We have less than 5 minutes until the orientation. You're lucky we're so close to the academy, now get off here and move. Sasuke turned to sprint back toward the academy, sparing a glance at the 2 tallest trees in the clearing as he did. These were the trees which he and Naruto had used for the tree walking exercise Hinata had introduced to them the night before. Both trees had been horribly brutalized. Long, deep gash marks from kunai knives ran up their sides, and in a few places were small craters just a little bit bigger than a human foot, as if the bark had been blown off the tree by a small yet explosive force. Sasuke noted that he still had a significant lead over Naruto. The kunai marks represented their progress in focusing set amounts of chakra into the soles of their feet, in order to stick to the sides of their respective trees, running straight up them. This chakra control exercise had been introduced to them by Hinata, whose clan had trained her in such advanced exercises from a very young age. Precision chakra control, she said, was essential in learning the gentle fist style. All of this she had explained the previous evening, while standing upside down on the underside of a thick tree branch, for all the world singing a silent, "you," to gravity. Naruto mumbled as Hinata hopped off the branch, neatly somersaulting to a standing position before him. So that's what it was. Naruto-kun, Hinata asked. That's what was? That girl in our class a while back, the one who snuck off to do some self-training and came back dead. Oh, Hinata said numbly. Why yeah, the newspaper made it sound like this is what she was doing. Well, it's cool and all, being able to walk up the side of a tree, and I can see how it'd be handy, Naruto said. But what exactly is it about this exercise that makes it so good for chakra control? Sasuke, who'd suddenly been much more interested in Hinata's explanation since she had demonstrated how to walk up a tree and stand upside down on the underside of one of its branches, stood next to Naruto. Although his expression was impassive as usual, his hands had left his pockets and his gaze had become slightly more intense. With this exercise, Hinata said, a ninja learns to focus and maintain a set quantity of chakra in a very specific part of the body, a part of the body that just so happens to be the most difficult place to focus one's chakra, the soles of the feet. Furthermore, by training until exact control of one's chakra becomes second nature, both in such a difficult way and under such stressful conditions, one improves their ability to keep one's focus razor sharp during a combat situation. This exercise enables you to expend no more and no less than the required amount of stamina in any given situation, and in theory, if you can master this exercise, no jutsu should ever be beyond your capacity to execute. Naruto was smiling at her in that way of his, with his head quirked to one side. Hinata felt her cheeks heat up just a bit. Well, that's how my grandfather explained it, she added meekly. Anyway, just use your kunai to mark your progress as you make your way further up the tree. Remember, though, the keys are concentration and moderation. If you use too much chakra, or too little, you'll lose your footing and fall. Naruto and Sasuke both nodded, and then drew their kunai knives. They each turned toward the two tallest trees in the clearing, one over yonder and the other a little ways hither on the other side of their training spot, and readied themselves. Before they commenced the exercise, Naruto smiled over his shoulder at Hinata and said, "Hey, Hina-chan, I appreciate this." "Really? Thanks." Sure," Hinata replied. When Naruto had turned to regard his chosen tree again, Hinata was struggling with a kind of giddy, relieved feeling. It was spreading from the butterflies in her stomach and threatening to overtake her very fingers and toes. As the exercise dragged on well past sundown, the foremost thought on Hinata's mind was that she was finally paying this wonderful boy back for all the good he'd done her. He had taught her so much, but now it was she who was teaching him. It was the first time in her life that she had been really and truly glad to have been born a member of her clan. Well, Sasuke still had a significant lead over Naruto, but in the extra training time Naruto had managed to force out overnight, the gap had certainly become a good deal smaller. Sasuke smirked, thinking he'd have to remedy that the next time they had a chance to work on that exercise. Hinata fidgeted in her seat, glancing again at the homeroom door. Iruka had already arrived and would be starting class any minute now. The three-man bench she now sat in felt stupidly empty without Naruto and Sasuke to fill it. She'd reserved it for them, but she'd hoped they'd be back by now. Naruto hadn't met either of them at the usual place, the swings, so Sasuke had grumbled something that sounded like, "I should have known," and told Hinata to go on ahead and save them all a bench. Then he'd leapt off in the direction of the woods. Did Naruto work himself to death? Hinata's panicked brain fluttered and fluttered. Oh, gods above, please say he didn't work himself to death. Or, he didn't fall off the tree and seriously injure himself, did he? Oh, I knew I shouldn't have shown him this exercise. Hinata shook her head and rubbed at her eyes, stilling her thoughts. No, Naruto wasn't that reckless. He was perhaps a bit too persistent when he thought he had a chance of soldiering through something, but he knew his limits and a little tumble off the side of a tree wouldn't do him in. Faith. Hinata, have faith. This is Naruto we're talking about, here. Nevertheless, when the classroom door slid open and Sasuke sprinted in, followed by a very scuffed up Naruto, she breathed such a sigh of relief that she wondered at the fact that it had taken only 2 lungs to contain it. The rest of the class fell silent, turning almost as one to regard the spectacle of the pair who'd barged in at the absolute last second. Iruka, who had stepped up front and center before the class, looked up from his clipboard and gave the two a look of exasperation. "Well," he said, "I'm glad you two decided to join us. It doesn't look good on your record if you go AWOL on your very first day." "Heh, sorry, Iruka-sensei," Naruto chuckled uneasily as he made his way to a seat. "We, had to save a tree from a cat." "Yeah," Iruka gave him a withering look and said, "Take your seats." And so the two joined Hinata at their usual desk. "Now that everyone is present and accounted for," Iruka said, "we can get down to brass tacks." Iruka looked each and every student in the room square in the eye, ensuring he had their complete and undivided attention. When he did, he began. "Each and every one of you in this room has proven yourselves adequately skilled in the secret arts this academy is duty-bound to instruct," he said. "You are no longer mere students of the ninja arts, you are full-fledged shinobi of the village hidden in the leaves. Though you are yet young in body, The Hittite you bear marks you as an adult in the eyes of the village and all who dwell within its walls. However, he continued, his tone taking on a slightly harsh quality. Naruto recognized it as that voice Iruka used whenever he was telling someone in a roundabout way not to let their success go to their heads. In the ranks of the Konoha shinobi, each of you is still a novice. You are now genin, junior level ninja. The path of the shinobi only gets harder from here on out. What waits before you are the real challenges, not sporting squabbles between inexperienced cadets, but true experience in the real world beyond the walls of the academy. One or two of you, Iruka's eyes met Naruto's for the briefest instant, may already have some idea of what awaits you out there. For those who do not, I say only this, the way of the shinobi is all uphill from this point on. Your greatest challenges are yet to come, but I have faith that, if every one of you puts your all into walking this road, you will emerge from the dust of battle, each a splendid Konoha shinobi in your own way. I wish you all the best of fortune. Iruka finished. After a pause, we will begin by dividing you into 3-man cells. Each cell will be mentored by a jonin, a senior ninja who will guide and coach you as you become familiar with your various assignments. The class now looked apprehensive, in various ways. For example, the majority of the females gazed with fiery eyes at their mutual object of affection, the raven-haired boy who had arrived so late today. Naruto, Sasuke, and Hinata tensed, and glanced at each other, each thinking the same thing. I have organized this class into teams, Iruka said, in order to balance the strengths and weaknesses of each team member, so that the strength of each team would be approximately equal. All team assignments are final. Iruka looked down at his clipboard, and announced the 3 members of the first squad. The 3 girls sat at the desk behind Sasuke, who had assumed the position, and was listening as impassively as ever while Iruka called out names one after another. These 3 girls were, from left to right, Ino Yamanaka, Kyoko Yuri, and Sakura Haruno. The desks were elevated stadium seating style, so the 3 had a fine view of the brooding hunk they were all making eyes at. The blonde, Ino, grinned a spiteful grin at the pink-haired one, Sakura, and said, "Well, forehead, someone's gonna be teamed up with Sasuke. I wonder who." Sakura responded with a dignified glance and a simple, "I don't know." On the inside, she was snarling, "Cha. There's no question, you pig. Sasuke will be teaming up with me." At this point, Naruto twisted around in his seat and said, "If it happens to be the one girl in class who isn't all googly-eyed for your precious Sasuke-kun, I am going to point at you, and laugh, and laugh, and laugh." All 3 girls turned eyes that promised death on the red-haired boy, who grinned his foxy grin and turned back round to face Iruka. A few moments later, Next. Cell number 7, Iruka said. Uchiha, Sasuke. A sharp intake of breath from nearly every girl in class. Uzumaki, Naruto. A small smirk on Sasuke's face, invisible behind his folded hands. And Hyuga, Hinata. There was a collective, scandalized gasp from the classroom's female population, which was quickly overpowered by a sudden scuffle at a desk to the far right. A sharp, "Urk." From Sasuke and a "Meep." From Hinata as both of their arms were lifted into the air by the red-haired boy between them, who held their arms aloft as though they'd won a tournament championship round. "And the winner is," Naruto declared, "Hinata Hyuga. Let's all give the lucky lady a round of applause, gentlemen. I'm sure she and this fine young stud will be making many babies together in the none too distant future." Sasuke spluttered out a, "Hey." And Hinata's face very nearly turned the color of a red delicious apple. The kunoichi of the class had gone slack-jawed with varying degrees of envy or dismay. The male population was beginning to snigger at their expense. Then Naruto dropped his teammate's hands, blinked a few times, and said, "Oh yeah, before I forget." He twisted around in his seat, and extended a single finger to point at the 3 furious girls behind him. "Ha, ha, ha, see. This is me, pointing at you, and laughing. And laughing. For you have all lost the game. Ha! Iruka had been stunned to silence by the outburst. Sasuke groaned and closed his eyes, reassuming the position. Before his own amusement could become apparent, Hinata was mouthing the word, babies, over and over with a mortified look on her face. As Iruka called the class to order with a very miffed look on his face, sorry, Iruka-sensei, caught up in the moment, won't happen again. Naruto was giggling apologetically. Hinata suddenly felt a peculiar sensation, as if half a dozen laser beams had been directed at the back of her head. Looking over her shoulder, she saw Ino, Kyoko, Sakura, and a number of other girls whose names she could not recall, all glaring directly at her. Their killing intent is almost palpable. Hinata quailed. Naruto-kun, you. Hinata buried her face in her hands. But, she peeked out at the red-haired boy and their raven-haired companion. Naruto was still fighting a losing battle with a fit of silent laughter. From her sidelong angle, Hinata could see the small curve of a satisfied smirk behind Sasuke's intertwined fingers. The three of us were a team now. They would all, truly, begin the long walk down the path of the shinobi, together. As one. Kakashi Hatake surveyed the dilapidated apartment with a single lazy eye. The other, of course, was hidden beneath his eyed Hitai-8. The lower half of his face was concealed behind a black mask, and a shock of silver hair stood out at an awkward angle above his forehead protector. It was a quaint little abode. The paint on the walls showed signs of having peeled off in places. The kitchen was positively microscopic, relatively speaking, and Kakashi could see the edge of a sloppily made bed through the open door of the apartment's single bedroom. A man in a familiar white cloak sat waiting at the kitchen table. Kakashi meandered over to the man, taking in the various little details about the place that he cared about. It's not as disorganized as one might expect the home of a 12-year-old to be, he noted. As he strolled into the kitchen, he took notice of the single clean plate that had been left out to dry in a tray next to the sink. So, Kakashi said, turning his lazy eye on Hiruzen Sarutobi, this is Naruto's apartment, huh? Yes, it is, replied the third Hokage. He's grown into a fine young ninja, despite his relative lack of supervision. I think you'll like him. Kakashi winced a bit, not missing the third lord's veiled jab at Kakashi's own negligence. One more thing, Sarutobi said. The other boy in your cell, the Uchiha. I'll take care of it, Kakashi said, with a lazy nod. Good, Sarutobi replied. I have the utmost faith in your abilities, Kakashi. You do remember my track record with regards to passing the students assigned to me, right, Hokage-sama? Kakashi asked flatly. Sarutobi turned an amused eye on the masked Jonin. I'm aware, he said. There's a reason I advised Iruka to assign this particular set of genin to your cell, you see. Chuckling to himself, Sarutobi stood up and shuffled his way to the front door of the apartment. When he had gone, Kakashi said, huh. Then he, too, departed, locking the door behind him. Neither left so much as a trace of their presence in the boys' apartment, which was empty, save for the 3 genin assigned to Team 7 and their scar-nosed homeroom instructor. Each and every other cell had been introduced to their respective Jonin mentors and had departed for God's new where. As it stood now, an hour had passed since the alluring woman with those deep, red eyes had departed with her team. This last team to leave the classroom had consisted of Sakura Haruno, Kiba Inuzuka, and Shino Aburame. Sakura had obviously been more impressed with her new sensei than her squadmates. Literally nothing had happened since then. Iruka had remained at his desk, filling out some sort of paperwork that Sasuke didn't give a shit about. Naruto and Hinata had chattered away for a time, but conversation had dried up some time ago. Naruto now sat reading a book he'd checked out from the academy library a week before, a general overview of foreign shinobi tactics and how to counter them. He claimed it to be a horrendously boring book. It's the writing style, he'd said. Damn thing reads like a zombie wrote it. You'd think a book about foreign ninjutsu would have to actually try to bore the reader, but hot damn, does this book prove that stereotype wrong in so many ways. When Hinata had asked him in turn why he was reading it, he'd replied that boring or not, it might be handy to know this stuff someday. The chapter on Suna's puppet masters was particularly enlightening, Naruto added. There was a shuffling of paper and the sound of a drawer opening and closing. The three genin of Team 7, utterly and completely zoned out by this point, all looked up. Iruka was standing up, and looking at the clock. So, Iruka-sensei. Naruto said from behind his book, when is our super uber duper elite ninja mentor thing going to make an appearance? Iruka rubbed at the place where his nose became his forehead. Probably not for another half an hour, knowing him. Naruto ed an eyebrow. Sasuke made an impatient twitching motion with his thumbs, the soul, flinch, mentioned above. Hinata looked from the clock to Iruka, and back again. Is our sensei usually so late to important meetings? She asked. Usually, Iruka said. It was that sort of long-suffering tone one uses when discussing an annoyance that has become such a part of one's lifestyle over time that you can't even be annoyed by it anymore. Any particular reason for that, boss? Naruto asked. Probably had to save a tree from a cat, Iruka deadpanned. Anyway, I have business to attend to, Iruka said. You three just wait here until he shows up. Naruto shrugged, and returned to his book. The wait, Sasuke could deal with. That was no problem. The problem was that not long after Iruka disappeared through the homeroom door, Naruto had grown tired of his book. He slipped it back into his supply pack and had commenced with his most annoying impatient habit. Ratatata. Sasuke's left eye twitched. Naruto, eyes on the clock, didn't notice. The red-haired boy continued to tap his pencil on the desk in front of him, as he had been doing for the better part of the past 10 minutes. Naruto-kun, Hinata said, you're doing it again. Naruto snapped out of his boredom-induced trance. He looked down at the rapidly tapping pencil in mild surprise. Oh, the tapping stopped. Naruto-kun, Hinata said timidly. Maybe you should put the pencil away. I can't help it, Naruto whined. I just need something to do with my hands. Now, boredom can have strange effects on the human brain. Hinata, for instance, had been sitting in silence for more than an hour now, and as teenage minds tend to, hers had drifted more than once to topics of a somewhat unclean nature. The reason I say this now? Because Naruto's remark about doing something with his hands had an unintentional effect on Hinata. The question of exactly what thoughts provoked her latest blush, however, shall be left to the imagination. More importantly, it was in the midst of this blush that the classroom door slid open. 3 pairs of eyes, one embarrassed, one annoyed, and the other stoic and cold, looked to the door as one. In stepped a shinobi. Clad in a standard ninja uniform and vest, the lower half of his face was obscured by a black mask. One lazy right eye rolled to survey the 3 lone genin from beneath a sideswept head of silver hair and crooked hitai that covered the eye's counterpart. You 3 must be my squad, then, the man said. His voice was nearly as laid back as his eye. Sorry to have kept you waiting. You see, on the way here, I had to save a tree from a cat. Naruto supplied. Yeah, that, the silver-haired ninja said. A pause. Then, wait. Sasuke looked the man up and down as he assumed an exaggerated, thinking, pose, appearing to deliberate what he had just agreed to. He looks completely worthless, Sasuke thought. Is this really a Jonin? All joking aside, the masked man said, it's about time we get the ball rolling, isn't it? I want you all to meet me on the roof in 5. By whose watch? Naruto asked dryly. The lazy-eyed shinobi chose to ignore this comment, instead turning and strolling right back out the door without another word. The 3 newly minted genin looked at each other, their exasperation clearly evident. Well, Naruto said at length as they stood up to follow. How shall I put this? Based on my first impression, He's a complete idiot, Sasuke finished for him. Hinata fidgeted with her fingers. I hate to speak ill of a stranger, but. Actually, Naruto said lightly, I was going to say, I like the guy. But that works, too. Sasuke and Hinata turned incredulous eyes on their red-haired comrade as he set off to follow their Jonin commander. Then they looked at each other. Sasuke grunted. He would. Hinata giggled. The academy rooftop stood high over the surrounding structures, with exception to the Hokage Tower just over the way. Beneath a series of archways on the western side of the roof, there stood a series of 6 small trees. If this particular patch of roof served any special purpose, Naruto was unaware of it. Unsurprisingly, the 3 friends somehow arrived before their sensei. They had been waiting for several minutes, sitting next to each other on a pair of low steps leading up to the archway, grove, when their lazy-eyed sensei showed up on time. The man strolled onto the roof, and as he did, he slipped something into his supply satchel. Looked like a book. Naruto had the strangest feeling he'd seen the book somewhere before. Yo, the man said. Taking his sweet-ass time, he walked over the low railing at the edge of the rooftop and half sat against it. Before we do anything, I think we should get to know each other a little better. So I'd like you each to tell us all a little bit about yourselves. Sure thing, sensei, Naruto said. Which specific little bit are you looking for? Oh, you know, likes, dislikes, hobbies, dreams for the future. Stuff like that. Sensei, Hinata mumbled. Naruto winced a bit, but covered it quickly. They'd made progress on her shyness issues, but she was still a bit too meek with strangers. Kakashi prompted. Well, sensei, the 3 of us already know each other, so. What she means is, you made us wait an hour and a half longer than anyone else, so you get to go first, Naruto said dryly. Hinata's smile at the interruption was a sheepish one. Oh, right, I suppose that's fair, the man said. My name is Kakashi Hatake. I dislike talking about my likes and dislikes. Dreams for the future. Kakashi stroked the chin of his mask, seeming to ponder the question. Never really thought about it. But anyway, I have lots of hobbies. The 3 genin waited for him to elaborate. When he did not, Naruto looked to each of his friends in turn. Well, I learned something today, he insisted with a shrug. The others just stared blankly back. You're up next, smartass, Kakashi said. Sure thing, Naruto replied. Name's Naruto Uzumaki. I like ramen, spicy foods, dango, and girls with indigo hair. Hinata's face went a bit pink at this. I especially like messing with my friends' heads. The looks on their faces can't be priced. Hinata's face went a bit pouty at this. Kakashi watched this one-sided exchange in mild amusement. I hate vegetables, Naruto said, crossing his arms with a sour look on his face. But I eat 'em anyway. Kakashi thought. And my dream is. Naruto reached up and tapped his Hitai lightly with a single finger. To be a true shinobi, like those guys on the rocks over there, the kind of shinobi that I can take pride in, so I won't have to worry about what anyone else thinks of me. Kakashi, Hinata, and Sasuke all glanced at the Hokage monument. Well, thought Kakashi, he's turned out interesting, hasn't he? Right, then, the lazy-eyed Jonin said. Now, young lady, if you would. Why yes, sensei, squeaked Hinata at the sudden attention. My name is Hinata Hyuga. I like, a blush, then, zensai. Yes, zensai, and cinnamon rolls, and I don't really like seafood much. My hobby is pressing flowers. Naruto turned a surprised eye on his friend. You never told me you liked pressing flowers. I didn't. Hinata stammered. Oh, I guess I didn't. Anyway, my dream is. Kakashi half expected the girl to blush again and mumble some substitute for. My dream is to be with the guy the first have a crush on. Hers and that of every other kunoichi under the age of 18. Kakashi mused, but her reaction surprised him, although once she voiced her dream, he realized it probably shouldn't have. Hinata appeared to deflate ever so slightly as she considered her next words. Slowly, she continued, I guess, I just really want to make my own path in life, you know. What interested Kakashi most wasn't that he had yet another cadet branch kid on his hands who obviously rued her own fate. As far as he was concerned, that statement was right up there with, the sky is blue, and, oh look at how green the leaves are, this fine spring evening. What Kakashi found interesting was the reactions of the two boys to this girl's immediate left. Naruto was looking at Hinata with a sympathetic, thoughtful sort of look. Sasuke, who'd remained more or less a statue the entire time, Kakashi would one day also come to think of this as the Sasuke position, frowned behind his hands. But this means, they know about the Hyuga clan's curse seal. That's surprising. Usually, it's too sore a topic for cadet branch kids to discuss with their peers. Well, that was enlightening, Kakashi said. Last, but not least. As one, the three who'd already spoken turned to regard the one who hadn't. Sasuke was silent for a time, then began. My name is Sasuke Uchiha. There are a lot of things that I hate, but I don't see that it matters, since I don't particularly like anything. Gee, thanks, Naruto mumbled. And I don't have any hobbies, unless you count training as one of them. If it's work-related, it's not a hobby. Naruto muttered. What I have is not a dream, because I will make it a reality. I plan to restore my clan, and there is someone I have sworn to kill. There was a tense silence following this pronouncement. A chill wind blew, as if to accentuate it. Well, Naruto said easily, with the excess of skirts chasing after you, that, restore my clan, bit shouldn't be too much trouble. And the tension was broken. Kakashi watched in mixed amusement and apprehension as Sasuke turned to scowl at his red-haired friend, who just grinned a foxy grin and said, well, it's true. As I suspected, Kakashi thought, disregarding Naruto's antics. Right, then, Kakashi said, standing up. The three genin turned their full attention on the Jonin. Now that we all understand each other, we can begin formal training. You have the rest of the afternoon off, and are to meet me at practice field 23 tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock sharp. By whose watch? Naruto asked dryly. When Kakashi chose to ignore the jab yet again, Hinata spoke up. Sensei, could you tell us what we'll be doing tomorrow? What our duties will be as we're starting out? Tomorrow, you'll be undertaking your first real shinobi mission, Kakashi said cryptically. The three were now paying him rapt attention. Hinata began to fidget with her fingers as Kakashi's dramatic pause dragged on. Quote. What will the mission entail? Survival exercises, Kakashi said bluntly. Sasuke's brow furrowed, and Naruto said, that's not a mission. On the contrary, Kakashi said, speaking seriously for the first time since they'd met him. It is a mission. And how do survival exercises qualify as a mission? Naruto asked. We've already covered all of that at the academy. This won't be your typical practice exercise, Kakashi said. You'll have to survive against me. Oh, Naruto said, like a test of our ability, so you know what our strengths and weaknesses are. There is that, too, Kakashi said, again with the cryptic pause. Hinata fidgeted with her fingers once again. For some reason, she had a bad feeling about where this was going. Why you mean, there's another reason, Kakashi-sensei. At this, Kakashi began to laugh. Hinata's fidgeting increased, and Naruto clicked his tongue impatiently in his mouth. Finally, Naruto said, did something about that question amuse you, sensei? It's nothing, Kakashi said. It's just that if I tell you, you'll probably chicken out. Damn it, man. Stop taunting us and get to the point, said Naruto. Very well, sighed Kakashi dramatically. Then his expression became stern. This is the truth, he began. Of the 27 members of your graduating class, only 9 will actually be accepted as genin. The other 18 will be weeded out and sent back to the academy for more training. The test we are about to perform has a 66% rate of failure. Hinata's fidgeting sped up still more. Sasuke's intertwined fingers tightened their grip on each other ever so slightly. Naruto quirked his head to one side, a shrewd look on his face. So the graduation exam we took 2 days ago was more of a pre-graduation exam. Kakashi smiled. Why, yes, that's a good way to put it. That exam exists only to eliminate the hopeless cases. Those who remain are the ones who show true potential. Tomorrow's test is the real deal. If you come up short, you might get a chance to kiss that shiny, new headband of yours goodbye before you're forced to return it to Iruka and take the whole year over again. Huh. His only reaction is, huh, Kakashi thought. Behind the red-haired boy, Sasuke was doing a very poor job of hiding his apprehension, and Hinata looked like one solid push would provoke a panic attack. In any event, Kakashi said, we'll meet up at the training field tomorrow so that I can evaluate your strengths and weaknesses. Bring all of your ninja tools and equipment. And one more thing. Don't have breakfast beforehand, unless you enjoy throwing up. And with that, Kakashi turned and strolled lazily back down the stairs, leaving the three friends to their nerves. Naruto watched him depart. Naruto-kun. Naruto turned to regard the girl with a reassuring smile. Don't sweat it. It can't be that bad, or no one would ever pass. Hinata visibly calmed at this. Why yeah, she said. Yeah, you're right, Naruto-kun. So, Naruto said as he heaved himself to his feet and stretched his arms out behind his back. Who's hungry? I'm in the mood for seafood. How about you, Hina-chan? I'm kidding. Actually, I was thinking barbecue. Hinata let out a relieved laugh. Oh, okay. That sounds good. Sasuke grunted, standing up. Sounds alright. And let's all meet up for breakfast before this test of his, Naruto added as they set off toward the stairs. What? Stammered Hinata. But Kakashi-sensei said, it's probably one of those, see-through deception, things, Naruto said, waving a dismissive hand in the direction of nothing in particular. Sides, better to risk getting a little vomit on one's shirt than to turn up all wobbly-kneed from lack of food. No telling how long this survival thing's going to take, so I'd rather err on the side of nausea. He has a point, Sasuke admitted. If you say so, Naruto-kun. Hinata said, sounding unconvinced. Leaf cafeteria, tomorrow morning at 6, declared Naruto with an air of finality. And if you don't eat at least 2 helpings, then so help me, the next time you pass out you will wake up in your underwear, hanging upside down from the first Hokage's left nostril. Hinata stopped where she stood, cheeks a deep pink, lips opening and closing like those of a beached trout. Several moments passed. Naruto-kun, she whined, jogging to catch up. Hinata slept more soundly than she'd expected to that night. It was as though all of her previous worries about the morning's upcoming test had been dispelled. And it wasn't exactly a mystery how. Naruto hadn't given either Hinata nor Sasuke so much as an inch of legroom to obsess over the test. The night had been spent eating, talking, and laughing. Sasuke had mostly just eaten, but Hinata had known the Uchiha prodigy long enough to tell that he'd enjoyed the atmosphere. There was something about Naruto that made it nearly impossible for Hinata's anxiety to take hold while she was around him. It was as though the boy radiated an aura of contagious self-confidence. Even when the conversation had shifted to Kakashi's final exam, this sense that failure wasn't even in the cards had persisted. They would pass this test and they would pass it so hard and so fast that the test would get whiplash trying to keep up with how hard and fast they'd passed it. Or so Naruto had said. Sasuke and Hinata were fine with just passing it at all, thank you very much. Even so, Hinata couldn't help but be nervous when her alarm clock woke her up on the morning of the test. Rolling out of bed, she sleepily reached over to her bedside table. Her hands found her leaf headband, and she clutched the forehead protector to her chest like a talisman. She thought of everything she had done to get this far, of everything that Naruto had taught her, and she willed the anxiety to the back of her mind. When she donned her Hitai-8, she was looking into the full-body mirror across from her bed with a smile. Then her smile faded into something more serene as her eyes slid down her own fully clothed reflection, which at the moment, lacked her customary hooded jacket. For some odd reason, she felt good about that, as well. Nevertheless, force of habit had her clad in a beige jacket when she slid the door of her room closed, and left the cadet branch's wing of the Hyuga compound. Hinata had always been a modest girl, she was just less self-conscious about it now. Her grandfather would still be sleeping at this hour, but several attendants were shuffling about their morning tasks as Hinata made her way toward the central courtyard garden. Each wore either a headband or a snug wrap of bandages around their forehead. Hinata's smile fell as past Ibuki Hyuga, but she snatched it back up and pushed the thoughts of her clan's claustrophobic restrictions to the same corner of her mind that housed her forgotten anxiety. Hinata had never wanted to be a ninja in the first place, you see, but for a member of the Hyuga clan's cadet branch, there were but two viable paths in life. One either lived their life within the walls of the Hyuga clan compound as a servant and guardian, or one enlisted as a shinobi of the Hidden Leaf Village. Most chose this second path. The larger of two cages was still a bit roomier than its counterpart, after all. Hinata had half-heartedly chosen to enroll at the academy in spite of her grandfather's insistence that she lacked the necessary talent, or, perhaps, because of it, but for the better part of her academy career, she had done nothing but prove her grandfather right. This had continued until the day when Naruto had reached out to her. Even then, the struggle to change herself had felt like a hopeless one at first. But she had changed in the end, hadn't she? Neji's proclamation that she was fooled to think she could alter what fate had chosen for her, it had rung hollow after. Hinata gave a start as the object of her thoughts came into view. Her cousin, Neji Hyuga, sat cross-legged with his eyes closed, his straight back almost but not quite up against the side of a tree. His long, brown hair was slung over his right shoulder at that moment, and as always he was clad in the traditional Hyuga robes. His forehead lay bare, marking his status as a member of the clan's main household. Hinata felt like slapping herself for forgetting their sainted heir's morning meditation. Of course he'd be out here now. Had she remembered, she'd have bypassed the gardens entirely. Her steps sped up even as she made each one just a little bit lighter, in the hopes that he would overlook her presence. Their previous disagreement was long behind them, but even so, Hinata wanted to keep as much distance between her and her cousin as possible. Apparently it was not to happen this day, however, as Neji's eyes snapped open before she had taken more than 5 paces. His gaze was chill and condescending as his eyes fell on Hinata, who froze at the look. Reflexively, Hinata turned toward her cousin. "Good morning, Neji-sama," she said with a bow of her head. She pushed back another wave of anxiety as she felt his eyes slide upward, and she realized he was staring at her forehead protector. She endured his gaze for a long moment before he said, "Where are you off to?" It sounded more like a command than a question. "I am to meet my Jonin commander at the practice field by 7 o'clock, Neji-sama," Hinata answered dutifully. "I have agreed to meet my teammates for breakfast before training. Is there something I may do for you, my cousin?" Neji gazed back steadily, then said, "Your teammates. Who are they?" "I don't see why it's any of your business, cousin," Hinata thought, but without allowing the sentiment to show, she answered, "They are Naruto Uzumaki and Sasuke Uchiha, Neji-sama." "The Uzumaki boy again," Neji said, just a little bit scathingly. "Take care that you don't grow too attached to him, Hinata." Something flickered in Hinata's eyes before she could catch it and hide it. Neji, taking note of this, closed his eyes again. "You may go," he said. His face was impassive as a statue's, but Hinata, as she turned to continue her walk to the Leaf cafeteria, could almost have sworn she detected a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Was she imagining it? For some reason, she hoped she was. It was 10:56, going on 11 o'clock. It had been 3 hours. 3 hours, since the Team 7 genin had arrived at their designated training ground, a wide open flatland surrounded by dense forest and a small lake. 3 thick, man-high punching posts stood in a neat line off to the side of the training field, across from which stood a flagpole and a sizable memorial stone bearing the names of ninja who had fallen in the line of duty. The 3 had regarded the stone with puzzled curiosity when they'd arrived. None could quite fathom the logic behind placing such a memorial on a practice field. They could only surmise that the monument predated the training field itself. Naruto had long since put away his book, and now lay reclining on the grass with his arms behind his head. Sasuke stood with his hands in his pockets, and Hinata sat next to Naruto. Each either had a hefty supply backpack on the ground next to them, or in the case of Hinata, wore it on her back, reclining against it as she sat. All 3 were once more zoned right on out of the cosmos, dead to the world in all but the literal sense. And then came Kakashi, strolling on up as if nothing happened. When Hinata stood up, saying, "Guys, he's here," Naruto had simply turned his head to look at the incoming teacher without comment. Sasuke was just being Sasuke, acting all cool and stoic, as per the usual. "By your watch, then," Naruto stated as the man strode into earshot. "Sorry I'm late, guys," Kakashi said unabashedly. "A black cat crossed my path, so I had to take the long way. Taking a detour through the land of ogres for good measure, I take it," Naruto quipped. With a motion like a full-body whip crack, the red-haired genin flung himself straight into a standing position. "I may have taken a wrong turn or 2, admitted Kakashi. "Or 3, or 4, or 500, Naruto said flatly. "Admit it, sensei, you rolled right over in bed and went back to sleep, didn't you?" "Here's how we're going to do this," Kakashi said, verbally sidestepping the accusation. He walked over to the nearby punching posts and set down his supply bag. From it, he extracted a large, ungainly alarm clock. "I've set this to ring at noon," he said, placing the clock on the middle post. He flicked the switch on the back, setting the massive bells on its sides to jangle at the appointed time. "You have until then to complete your assignment, which is..." He put a hand into his supply satchel and rummaged a bit. The 3 genin heard a faint jingle as he extracted. "To take these bells from me," Kakashi finished, holding out 2 ordinary, tiny, round cat bells from strings in his hand. "You need only 1 bell apiece. There are 3 of us, sensei," Naruto pointed out before Hinata could stutter out a question to the same effect. "Oh, you can count. That's a helpful skill for a ninja to have," Kakashi congratulated. "Yes, there are 3 of you. And 2 bells. You only need 1 bell apiece." "Again, sensei," Naruto deadpanned, "there are 3 of us. Why only 2 bells?" Kakashi continued as if Naruto had not said a word. "If any one of you fails, that one will go without lunch." He pointed to the punching posts. "Instead, you will be tied to one of those posts, and you will watch while I eat my lunch in front of you." "Oh," Naruto said. "Well, then." He grinned at Hinata. "Is that my cue to say, 'I told you so'?" Kakashi blinked as Hinata fidgeted with her fingers, the look on her face a mix of sheepish and relieved. Sasuke had smirked, then returned to his usual stoic self. "Not exactly the, 'oh, that's why he told us not to eat breakfast' response I usually get," Kakashi thought. "Since there are only 2 bells, one of you is definitely headed for the post," Kakashi said seriously. "And whoever that person is will be the first to fail. At least one of you." He looked to each student in turn, watching their reactions as the realization set in, is headed back to school, and disgrace. These reactions weren't the ones he usually got, either. Hinata's was the most dramatic of the bunch. She let out a sharp gasp, and looked to both of her friends. She appeared as though she'd been punched in the gut. Sasuke's expression simply got darker than it had already been. Naruto opened his mouth, closed it again, scrunched up his eyebrows, and said, "Why the would you bother putting us in teams like this? and then go and pull a stunt like that. Beg pardon, Kakashi said lightly. A stunt like what? Playing us against each other, setting up this kind of, every man for himself, kind of test. Naruto was losing his composure for the first time since Kakashi had met him. He looked to be fighting the urge to yell in Kakashi's face. If you want to test our individual skills, you can do that one by one, can't you? Sharp as attack, this one. I could, Kakashi said airily. But this is the way I do things. His eyes narrowed slightly. This is the way I do things, he said again, and my word is law. Remember that. Well, that noise, he heard Naruto mutter as the three genin made their way to the punching posts to discard their backpacks, except Hinata, who kept hers on her back. Never known a Hyuga to go so heavy on ninja gear before. Kakashi thought. A clan maverick, perhaps. The three moved to stand a good distance down the training field from their sensei, 15 feet or more. They started muttering to each other in hushed, hurried tones as they went about this. Kakashi watched this exchange in mild wonderment, wishing he were close enough to hear what they were saying. Hinata's look of distress changed to an affronted expression, and she stole a glance back at Kakashi. Sasuke said something with a quizzical look on his face, but Naruto waved him off. The clock is still ticking, Kakashi reminded them in a loud voice. The three turned strained, determined faces on their sensei. Kakashi held up the bells one more time. When I say, start, the exercise shall commence. You may use any and all ninja arts or tools in your possession, including shuriken and gentle fist attacks. If you don't come at me with the intent to kill, you'll never be able to take the bells. He tossed the bells up into the air, deftly catching them and, in the same motion, fastening the strings to the left side of his belt. And, start. At the signal, the three genin zipped off in separate directions, taking refuge in the surrounding woodlands. Well, they started out in separate directions, but that is what those in the business would call, bullshitting the enemy. This, Naruto had insisted on as they muttered amongst themselves just prior to the starting signal. Alright, guys, here's the game plan, Naruto said. He's expecting us to break off and make individual grabs for the bells, yeah. So when he says go, we all split up and go every which way. Hinata. Why yes, Naruto-kun. Use your Byakugan to track the two of us down. Find whichever one of us is closer to you, and then lead him to the other. We'll regroup in the forest and figure out a plan of attack then. Hinata stole a glance at Kakashi, her troubled expression hardening into something more like an insulted one. So you're saying we all work to get the bells together? Sasuke muttered. But then, which of us will actually get the bells? One of us is down for a failing grade no matter what. Hinata opened her mouth just a little, hesitantly, and as a matter of fact, she was about to offer to give up her claim on a bell to the others, but she never got past the first word of the offer. Naruto had waved Sasuke off with a hand and a look of irritation. No time for that now. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Kakashi called over to them. The clock is still ticking, he warned. The three genin turned as one to regard him, their faces set. For several long moments the two parties, one elite ninja and three determined trainees, stood on the practice field, staring each other down, as if the encounter were a scene in some cheesy cowboy flick. And, start. Off they went, in three separate directions. And as instructed, Hinata activated her Byakugan and surveyed the area. The basis of all shinobi arts is to become invisible, eradicate yourself. Kakashi murmured, rubbing the back of his neck. He looked around at the now deserted practice field. There was not a trace of his three students to be seen. Sighing, he said, well, they have the hiding part down well enough. If he'd wanted, he could have tracked them down easily enough, chakra charged his sense of smell and picked them off one by one, but that would be counterproductive. Time was against them, and if things ran true to form, his would-be hunters would make their own clumsy plays on him soon enough. Deciding to kick back and wait for his opponents to make the first move, the masked Jonin slipped a lazy hand into his supply pack and extracted his copy of Ika Ika Paradise, opening to the dog-eared page and picking up where he'd left off. Sasuke Uchiha lay prostrate in the foliage, peeking out at Kakashi Hatake from the older man's blind side. The masked Jonin had turned several pages in that bright orange book of his by the time the barely perceptible sound of stalking ninja met Sasuke's ears. Turning a wary eye in the direction of the disturbance, Sasuke breathed a sigh of relief as Naruto and Hinata slid into view, each slinking into position on either side of him. The three lay flat, looking out on their objective. "Well," Naruto said, "we've agreed that we'll be putting our heads together on this one. The real question is, what the hell are we gonna do now? Is he off guard, or just pretending?" Hinata asked. "Who can say?" Sasuke murmured. "He looks and acts like a total joke, but it could be just that, an act. And it doesn't look like he's going to be making a move until we make ours." The Uchiha bit his thumbnail, silent for a moment, before he spoke up again. "Naruto, you're the only one of us who's fought an experienced ninja before. Do you have any ideas at all on how we should do this?" Naruto clicked his tongue. "That was a completely different story," he said. "For one thing, I had advance warning, an idea of what I was up against, and the element of surprise on my side. I had plenty of time to set him up and knock him down." He turned shrewd eyes on his companions. "We have less than 1 hour to outwit a ninja who is both higher in rank than Mizuki, and a complete unknown." Naruto turned back toward Kakashi, who was shaking slightly with what looked to be the giggles. "Giggles?" Naruto stared for several long moments. "Let me think," he said, and lapsed into silence. Sasuke and Hinata waited. After about a minute and a half, Naruto spoke up again. "Hey, Hina-chan, what's that book he's reading?" "Let me see," she whispered. Her Byakugan's nearly invisible pupils shifted focus, and, oh, she squeaked. "Oh, my, well," Sasuke grunted. It's, she fidgeted uncomfortably. "It's, what?" said Naruto. "You, please don't make me say it," Hinata squeaked. The two boys both turned to look at her with raised eyebrows, and found she was blushing. "Hina-chan," muttered Naruto softly. "It's important. It's." But the rest was an unintelligible mumble. "Come again," Naruto said. That wasn't funny, Naruto-kun." Hinata snapped, her cheeks reddening all the more. "What wasn't funny? Just tell me the damn title already, I couldn't hear you." "Oh," Hinata said. Oh, right. It's. She gulped, then muttered. Ika. Paradise." Naruto blinked. Sasuke turned his eyes back to their sensei, whose giggles had subsided, with his lip curled in distaste. The man has absolutely no shame. "All right, then, Hina-chan," Naruto said cautiously. "I'm going to need you to do something for me that you're probably going to feel uncomfortable with. Bear with me, all right? If my idea is going to work, this is essential. Okay, what do you want me to do? Can you focus your Byakugan enough to read whatever page he's on?" "WWH." Hinata began to protest, but Sasuke's hand clamped over her mouth. "Trust me, Hina-chan," Naruto said, raising a hand to placate the girl. "I need you to read out whatever it is that's on the page he's reading. Look, if I tell you what I have in mind, will you help me out with this?" Hinata fidgeted once more, then stilled herself and nodded. "That's my girl," Naruto said. "Right, then, here's how it's gonna go down." To say that Hinata was embarrassed would have been the understatement of the decade. In fact, you could say that during Kakashi's bell test, the young Hyuga girl reached a plateau of mortification that even she had never imagined possible before, and which she would never again even come close to for the remainder of her days. Fortunately, the urgency of the situation, a pinch of determination and a teaspoon of adrenaline, one could say, helped just enough in her efforts to keep that infernal whiteness at bay. For a full 30 seconds, the girl lay flat on her belly, face in her hands, with only one thought on her mind. Don't faint, I must not faint, get it together, Hinata, do not faint. Gods above, her cheeks had never felt so hot. In those moments, she felt like she would never be able to look Naruto square in the eye again. But could you blame her? She had just read an extremely graphic passage from a smutty novel. A passage of highly kinky between two women and one man. Out loud. To her crush. To her crush. Don't faint. Don't faint. Don't faint. Don't faint. Please, Naruto said. We kind of need you conscious for this plan to work, you know. Why yeah, squeaked Hinata. The shroud of whiteness subsided. Oh, gods, that was too close. Too close. All right, now, Naruto said. I need to get in close to kick things off. Sasuke, when I go for his arm and leg. Right, Sasuke said. And Hinata, you keep hidden and keep those Hyuga eyes peeled until it's time for our little shuriken trick. Yes, Hinata said, relieved to find she'd gotten rid of her stutter. Alright, then, I'm off. And Naruto was off. Kakashi turned another page. He was 2 paragraphs in when a pair of shuriken flew from the brush at his blind side. Although his left eye was covered, he could hear the shuriken well enough to do something about it, so with one swing of his arm he caught them perfectly. His fingers slipped right on through the holes in the middle, and their deadly spin wound down harmlessly in his hand as he finished the paragraph and then looked up. So your blind spot isn't a blind spot, Naruto said casually as he stepped out of the brush. I guess you wouldn't have lasted long in the ninja world without adapting to that kind of handicap, would you? Nope, Kakashi said, rolling an eye to look up from his book. Wouldn't have lasted long if I'd walked out of hiding to converse with the enemy, either. I'm not here to converse, Naruto said, cracking his knuckles. A head-on assault is wasted here, Kakashi sighed, and turned back to his book. Won't know that, till I try, will I? Maybe he's not as sharp as I thought. Kakashi mused. Naruto sprinted straight at Kakashi and threw a punch, which Kakashi caught easily, without looking up from his book. Naruto then launched several punches and kicks in rapid succession, all of which were blocked with no apparent effort at all. A sweeping kick. Kakashi hopped it, without looking up from his book. A knee to the gut. Kakashi's caught it with his own, without looking up from his book. A backflipping donkey kick. Kakashi twisted smoothly out of the way, without looking up from his book. Well, Naruto said, panting a bit as he hopped back to his feet. I guess I've got a long way to go with the whole taijutsu thing, huh? So, sensei, out of vain curiosity, you reading that book right now to taunt us, or do you just really love your smut? Why, yes, Kakashi replied, turning a page. Quote. I see what you did there, Naruto said, and then launched into motion. Kakashi's eye snapped up from the book, he's moving faster than before. Suddenly, the red-haired boy spun around, swinging a sidelong fist at Kakashi's head even as he sent a light, low kick toward the Jonin's shins, from the right-hand side, which happened to be the hand that presently held a certain little, orange book. Kakashi caught the kick with one of his own as his left arm shot across to block the swinging punch, which twisted around halfway through and caught his arm. Naruto's left leg hooked itself behind Kakashi's, and for a brief moment the two ninja both stood on one foot each. Before this exchange had even gotten to the point where either could react to the other's counter, 6 shuriken flew from the trees, 2 aimed at the space behind Kakashi, 2 aimed at his present position, and 2 aimed at Naruto. Wah! Kakashi registered his situation in an instant. Naruto had caught his arm and hindered his footing, and one of the other 2 kids, almost before Naruto had made the move at all, had aimed shuriken for the places directly behind and before Kakashi, as well as at the Jonin himself. If Kakashi had been unencumbered, he could have either blocked or escaped in virtually direction, but without free movement and with both his hands occupied, well, he could have dropped the book, but that would have damaged it. Kakashi made the only choice that was a sure thing at the moment. A burst of chakra through that one grounded foot, and he was up in the air like a rocket. What Kakashi expected to happen was for Naruto, still clutching the Jonin's arm, to be thrown off balance, but in the instant before Kakashi had leapt upward, Naruto had released both limbs and deftly, between 3 fingers, Naruto snapped up from the air the 2 shuriken that Sasuke had sent his way, as planned, and with the briefest pause to consider the Jonin's speed of ascent, Naruto threw both stars directly upward. URK. Putting these moves in context after the fact, Kakashi would understand the brilliance behind them. Naruto had pulled his punches, feigned signs of minor exertion, and lulled Kakashi into such a sense of security that he hadn't seen fit to even put his book away. And then Naruto, with at least twice the speed and power he'd displayed seconds before, had surprised Kakashi into allowing his arm and leg to be occupied. The shuriken, thrown by Sasuke, had been timed simultaneously with this attack, meaning the Uchiha had been expecting it, meaning it had been premeditated and agreed on beforehand by both of them. The shuriken aimed at Naruto were intended to be thrown by Naruto. He had even accurately anticipated the direction of Kakashi's dodge. At the time, though, Kakashi could only react, a violent twist of his body, and with his free hand, he caught one of the 2 shuriken before it could collide with his midsection. The other, aimed at the bells themselves, flew harmlessly into the sky as his waist twisted out of the way. In the same motion, Kakashi stashed Ika Paradise away in his satchel. As Kakashi descended, however, Sasuke Uchiha emerged from hiding, springing to the top of a nearby tree. The boy's hands flicked through a series of signs. That technique it's beyond the capacity of any novice. His chakra shouldn't have developed enough to. Sasuke ed in a deep breath, held 2 fingers to his mouth, and blew hard through the gap between them. Fire style. Fireball jutsu. A blazing inferno erupted from Sasuke's mouth and engulfed the masked Jonin before he could land.